The truth is very concise. The words are very few. To me, there's no such thing as luck. All luck is preparation meeting opportunity. You have to be ready, prepared for that situation. Everybody runs from pressure. It's easy to blame somebody else, to play armchair quarterback, to say, oh yeah, if they would have ran this play, this would have happened. Pressure is a privilege. If the boss puts you into a pressure situation, that's a privilege. He believes in you. You better deliver.
What is up, YouTube? Live via satellite here, and today we are talking Kingdom, Manga chapter 589. All I'm going to say is after this chapter, I don't think there are any lengths that Ousen isn't willing to go to in order to achieve victory. And with the loyalty that Ousen's men showed this chapter, it seems like King Sho was right to keep Ousen on a short leash. Because with his ambitions and the fact that men are willing to die for him with smiles on their faces is proof enough that Ousen is a dangerous man. But with the development of this chapter, I cannot wait to see how Roboku handles this. Because if you remember back in chapter 550, when Roboku found out that Gyo had 20 days of food, he was so cocky, man. He even tossed a note out his hand like, yeah, we got this. So once this news reaches him about what's happening to Gyo, I can only imagine what his reaction is going to be like. Alright, so the chapter starts out with us seeing what happened 14 days earlier. And we see at the gates of the city that the soldiers were asking to see the ledgers of the citizens of the other cities before they would allow them into Gyo. And also, if they were not on the ledgers, that they would have to wait outside until their identities could be confirmed. But we also see some of Ousen's men sneaking in amongst the wounded. We see guys like Takura and Kato being carried in. But my personal favorite definitely has to be Kantetsu, who acted so injured that he didn't even have to walk. He literally got carted into Gyo on a stretcher. To me, that acting performance is worthy of the highest award. And the nominees are Soldier Number 1 with his performance as Takura, Soldier Number 2 with his heartfelt portrayal of the character Kato, and our final nominee, Soldier Number 3, in his role as Kantetsu. And the winner is Soldier Number 3.
How could he not win? What an amazing smirk.
And after seeing how successful they were infiltrating the city, we then move to the present time. And here we actually get to see the whereabouts of the people who snuck into Gyo. And right away we learn exactly what took Ousen's men so long to make a move. It took several days just for them to find the food stores and routes leading to them. Not to mention the fact that acquiring armor was a difficult task as well. But the other thing was that they needed to synchronize and hit all the food stores at once, otherwise it would be no point. And as they arrive at the storehouse, they expect that the other groups have gotten into position as well. But as they look on, one of the soldiers realizes that there's a lot of guards in there and that there's no way they're going to be able to make it out of there alive. But Ousen's men understand that that's the price that has to be paid because failure is not an option. And with that, we begin to see the guys start to hug and wish victory to Ousen-sama because these guys are realizing that these are their last moments and they understand just how important it is for them to get the job done. Then we find ourselves back with the Lord of Gyo, Earl Choki, and we see that he's being rudely awakened after obviously being exhausted trying to figure out ways to keep the city safe. And after a brief back and forth with the messenger, the Earl finds out that fire has broken out within the city. But not just any fire, the fire actually broke out in the large eastern granary, and even though they were able to kill all the culprits, the fire had already reached a point where it could no longer be extinguished. And even though the Earl has questions about who did this and how this could possibly have happened, there's no time for him to get any answers as 2 more messengers come in with reports from other storehouses. And we find out that the western storehouse has already burned down while the north and south are burning as they speak. The Earl is in shock and he literally can't believe what he's hearing. And now knowing that all the large storehouses have been set on fire, the Earl recalls the fact that he emptied out all the smaller and mid-sized storehouses and had already started to hand out food from the larger ones. And even though the Earl asks if the north and south stores are able to be saved, The messenger who delivered the news says that the men are desperately trying to put it out, but he already fears the worst. And for the Earl, that's where it all starts to sink in. That in a single night, Gyo has lost more than half of its food stores. And the funny thing here is, man, this whole thing is so reminiscent to what Sunsuiju did to Heki. But what Ousen did here was on such a greater scale that even though Sunsuiju was able to make Heki look like an idiot, when it comes to him being anywhere near Ousen's level, he still needs to take notes.
As the adage says, you give a poor man a fish and you feed him for a day. You teach him to fish. You give him no.
And as the Earl's really starting to think about it, he realizes that they didn't just lose half their food, they actually lost more than that. And as he curses the Chin, he somewhat gathers his resolve and gives instructions to his men to tally all the remaining food stores, no matter how small, because they can't afford to lose any more to fire, and also to go back over the city's population with a fine-tooth comb, but to do it quietly because they don't want the refugees or the soldiers to find out about their remaining food levels. And one of the messengers tells the Earl that he'll send word to Riboku and the king of what all occurred tonight once morning comes. But before he sends that message, the Earl first wants an accurate tally of how many days worth of food does Gyo actually have left. Then we move to outside of Gyo with the Kanki army. And we see all the soldiers gathering around to see what the commotion's all about. And not only do they notice that there's a fire inside, but they're also getting the aroma of food cooking from the burning storehouses. And knowing how hungry these guys are, that has to be driving them up a wall. I honestly don't know how these guys are gonna find a way to cope.
I'm so hungry, I want me someday. Oh, I'm so hungry.
He tired, y'all.
I want me someday.
And as we see all the officers of the Kanki army coming out of their tents looking confused, we see Ogiko trying to be helpful, running to get the boss up so that he can see what's going on. But he's surprised when he arrives at Kanki's tent to see him already awake, and it appears that he's the only one who isn't confused, as he complains about Ousen'S men being slowpokes and taking their sweet time. And we find out from the narrator's box that it would take one day for news of tonight's events to reach that place. So yeah, when it comes to that box, it could be talking about Kanton, or maybe it's talking about Riboku at the Tsukai Plains, but it's also the possibility that they're talking about this news actually reaching Ousen. But either way, we find ourselves back now at the Tsukai Plains on the morning of the 14th day. And we see everybody waking up on their way to the battlefield, with a lot of the focus being on some of the veterans like Bihei, Shosa, Sugen, and a few other OG members. And we find out from the narrator that today would be the fiercest day of battle that the Chin right wing has experienced, and that no one was more aware of this fact than Ten. And as she's watching the soldiers making their way to the battlefield, all she can think about in her head is that it's likely that most of them will die today, and that she herself will be the one sending them to their deaths. But while she's in the middle of trying to get her head in the right space, she's suddenly interrupted by Shin and Kyokai. And right off the bat, Shin notices that Ten is trembling like a newborn foal. And he tells her that the battle hasn't even started and she's already too tense. And when Kyokai says Ten's name, it looks like she intends to bring some good advice to the table, some words of wisdom to help Karyo Ten relax. That was clearly not the case. Ten and Shin are shocked that she's being groped by Kyokai. And after getting Kyokai off her, she asks, what is she doing? And Kyokai responds that she thought it would make her happy, apparently drawing from more of the information she learned from Kyo's show. It's funny because Kyokai's older sister was definitely a freak. I don't know where she was getting all her information from. But of course our boy Shin, seeing this as a great opportunity, decides that maybe he should go in for the fill on Kyokai. But as we can see, Kyokai's not having that. But Ten stresses to these guys, now's not the time to be fooling around. But it's here, seeing that Ten's more like herself right now, Shin tells her that that's more like it, and for her to just do the things like she always does, because if she overthinks things, then she'll wind up hesitating and making the wrong decisions. And that she should know already that there's no need for her to hold anything back, because when it comes to the Hishin unit, every last one of them would gladly put their lives on the line for the sake of victory. And even though Shin tries to go on a little further, Ten tells him that she gets it. And she thanks Shin for giving her the bit of courage that she needed today. And with newfound confidence, Ten says let's win this, with Shin co-signing that statement saying that this day shall be theirs. And then we find ourselves moving over to the Zhao side, in particular Chigaryu's army, and what he and his men are noticing is that the Heishin unit has now taken the center. And he's realizing that with the Heishin unit at the center, that it's probable that Shin has been appointed the right wing's commander. And what Chigaryu thinks is that they finally run out of ideas, and that this is their last desperate attempt to win. But Chigaryu is confident that in only half a day he will be able to defeat them, and finally mark the end of this entire battle. And that was the chapter in a nutshell, guys. Alright guys, so this was another great chapter of Kingdom. We didn't have to wait too long to figure out what Ousen'S men would actually do. We came right back the next chapter and got to see right away what Ousen was actually aiming for. Burning all the food was a great play, but like we were discussing in the last chapter, I'm just interested to find out what the Qin soldiers are going to wind up eating after this battle's over. Because with this food now going, I'm sure Ousen has to have had some other arrangements. But the stuff that happened in Gyo this chapter was really pretty interesting because now with the food burned, the Earl seems like he wants to try to keep things under wraps and keep things a secret. And it's obvious the reason why, because he doesn't want to incite any panic throughout the city. But the thing is, with such a large fire and obviously the smell the fire was making, I think it's going to be pretty hard for him to keep this all a secret. Especially once the rations start to be passed out and the citizens seeing that the portions have gotten a lot smaller. And maybe this is where Kanki may come into play, because perhaps there's some way that he can help incite some panic throughout the population. But there's also the question of, were those all of Ousen'S men? Did he have teams within the population just to burn the food and maybe other teams to help sow confusion after the fact? And if I had to take a guess about that, I would kind of lean toward the side that the people who infiltrated and burned the food were probably the only ones. Because we see that now after this situation, that they're going to be going back through the population to see if there are any other people who may not belong in the city. But another interesting piece of information we learned was that this information is going to be sent to not only Roboku, but actually the king as well. So we may find ourselves back with Tojo soon and seeing his thoughts on what's going to happen with Gyo, and possibly seeing how angry he is with Roboku, and seeing if he's still willing to follow through with his threat that he had earlier in the arc where he said that he would take Roboku's life if he failed. And it's funny that in the last chapter review that we actually discussed that Roboku and Ousen may not actually fight this arc. But after this chapter, there may still be a chance, because once Roboku finds out that the food stores have been burned and that now he's under a time limit, he may have no other choice but to finally go on the offensive to see if he can defeat the Ousen army so that he can make his way to a Gyo. And when it comes to the right wing's battlefield, I thought it was kind of interesting that we only saw Chigaryu this chapter. I was really interested to see if Gi-eun was going to venture out to the battlefield this day, or if maybe he was still too wounded, but I guess we'll have to wait till the next chapter to see if he'll participate in today's battles. But even though he was severely wounded, I'm still thinking that he'll be out there. But to me, it looks like this chapter was building up the matchup between Karyo-ten and Chigaryu. And honestly, I really do think that this is the perfect matchup for Ten, because we did learn earlier from Ousen that Chigaryu was the brains of Zhao's left wing. And now we're going to get to see him strategically matched up against Ten, who's going to have to be the brains for Qin's right wing. So even though she was unable to match up against Gi-eun and had her confidence kind of shaken by an instinctual general, this seems to be the perfect billing for her to be able to recapture some of that lost confidence. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about this chapter, but now let's move on to the comment of the week. And this week's comment goes out to D.A. Cooper, and what he had to say was, I've always wondered how the hell Rinko killed all of those officers during his night raid. Now we know. The foot soldiers dropped the ball. And yeah, now that you mentioned it, Rinko was really going in on that night raid. So apparently he was probably going around looking for people like Bihei to trick, and probably telling them that he was a high-ranking officer, and if they could point him in the direction of whichever officer he was trying to kill next. And I didn't think of that when we saw that scene between Bihei and Danza last chapter, but that's probably a pretty good explanation about how he was easily able to take so many officers' heads in a single night. But anyway guys, that about does it for this week's review. Let me know what you guys thought of the chapter in the comments section below. Please leave a like if you guys enjoyed the video, and feel free to share, comment, and subscribe. Peace out!